And what'll happen is you'll all of a sudden you'll go like that, and now you got a mess. So something a little different today. We're not going to be fixing this. I'll tell you what I mean. Let's get into it. So back when I first got into SMD, I needed a little practice. So what I used to do, I used to get a lot of these boards in that were just scrap from people. And I would just practice harvesting stuff and putting it back on, and didn't really know if it worked or not. So what this is some kind of network router that's just been laying in the bin, and I feel like relaxing a little bit and just doing a harvest session. A lot of this stuff isn't worth a whole lot, but it's fun to clear your mind, and you can get a little practice. So something like this here, if you're first trying out SMD and you've got something like a cheap network router that you don't use anymore, plug it in, see if it works, open it up, try and remove one of these chips, then put it back, plug it in, see if it still works. So we're going to use a couple different things here. We're going to start off, we're going to use this typical iron. You can use whatever iron you have. We've got a vacuum desoldering, solder tweezers, solder sucker. We're just going to try a few things. So like I said, this is just a little relaxing for me. So we're going to start with the big guys. And one of the best things you can do is wet your solder joints. So we're going to pull these big caps off, these LEDs out of the way, these sockets, interesting switch over here. These coils are always nice to have, a little inductor. They're nice to have around. This may be a relay. I'm not sure what that guy is. So let's go in and wet some of this up. See, I'm able to hit both those LED leads and they just fall right out. Some of these caps, look at this cap here, I bet you we can get both these leads and just wiggle this guy out. This is probably lead-free solder, so it's taking a little bit to get it out. Especially when you get through the board, now the solder doesn't wick down and transfer the heat, so it'll stop coming out on you. A good little tactile switch. Bent the legs a little bit, they can be straightened out. Now these caps are always a risk, you never know, but I'm into it, we're going to pull them. I'll run them through a test to see if they're any good. Now where are those big ones here? Somewhere here, huh? I'm really not sitting on that post very long. See, that feels like something else. What is that? Oh, this is this coil. This is the cap. This is the cap. So we'll loosen a bunch of this stuff up, and then we're going to come in with the solder, the vacuum sucker. So sometimes these guys, you'll actually be able to get these right off by heating both sides. And there we go. A little spot of just stuck on there. So larger diodes are interesting. Well, most of this SMD stuff is really not worth trying to get because it's too hard to really maintain it. And you're better off just having a sample book. See how that guy just came right off of there? You know, even something like this little guy here, he's going to slide right off. Lie to me. No, that guy doesn't want to come off. These little transistors. I have so many of these already. All right. Sometimes they fight you. This probably would have been better going in with the iron now. Let's come back to that guy. Now, since we're not really worried about the condition of the board, we can get a little aggressive with it. Was that 2200, 25 volt? It's interesting. Not really that we need these sockets, but I guess you never know. Every now and then I'll get some industrial thing in that has a damaged network socket on it. Again, if it doesn't want to release on you, fill up the hole again. That gives the solder a way to transfer the heat through the other side of the board where it's probably not wanting to let go. And sometimes doing this, you'll find some interesting components. And then sometimes I'll go back and I'll look these up, get their data sheets, put them on a spreadsheet of parts. And sometimes you'll learn about a part you didn't know. See, a lot of times with caps, it's the ground plane that's much thicker and goes through both sides, and that'll be the part that kind of fights what you're doing. This is a good little DC jack. The switch too is interesting. There's a good little DC jack. Pretty hefty connections on it. It's an interesting little switch here. Let's get that guy off. A lot of times with switches you want to watch. Too much heat and you'll ruin them. Again, this is another good way to practice. Can I get it off without ruining it? And can I put it back on? And sometimes it'll just give you a reason to try different ways to try and get it off. And just be patient with it. Ooh, it's toasty. Ooh, that's toasty. Oh, see, I'm touching right on the back of that thing. Touching right on the metal, and it's hitting me. A good little DC jack. It didn't get too mucked up. Oftentimes there's a lot of solder left over. You can go back and clean that up. Ground plane. We've almost got all the through hole parts out. We're going to wiggle those caps out. I'm heating one side, pulling it down. You can tell when it's loose. If it's not moving, the solder's still holding it in. I'm hitting the top edge of the board and it's not wanting to transfer the heat as much. So I really kind of have to slow down. And sometimes you get stuff in the way, like this coil doesn't want to let it wiggle. If you really need to and you know it's a bad cap, you can always destroy them, cut them off, twist them off. Five legs on that, so it's probably a common mode choke. So what do we got left of all the big stuff? I'd like to get these caps off. Those I'd be interested in. Hang on to those. We've almost got all our big stuff off. We're kind of hitting a situation where we need some real heat. So we're going to come in with some hot air. So this is almost loose. It's been desoldered, but it's still hanging on. There's quite a few pins through there. So we're just going to warm this board up. Could be holding on to the back side And I can feel the heat on this thing. And I can feel the top is loose, but it's my bottom that's still hanging on. And it's wiggling in my hands, and there we have it. That's some kind of transformer. And we wanted this switch. It was giving us, it's hanging on a little bit. So we don't want to hit it with too much heat. If we can get in fast, see, I just felt something let go. It's the ground lug. There we go. So all of this is really to try and get some practice on removing one of these smaller components. Let's try and move something like this guy, because that might be something you run into that you need to change. So let's get a little, where are we looking at here? Let's get a little flux on it. And you could always come in, hit it with your iron. You're basically wetting those tips. Now, you can, if you need to, you've got 2 irons. You can take these things off that way. They're just not fun. So I'd recommend a hot air station. This would be one of those ones, if you could get this component off and put it back on, and your router still worked, or whatever cheap device you've got, something that's dispensable, disposable, and it works for you, then you know you're going good. See how that comes right off of there? It's all about getting the heat in and the heat out. So the same can happen with some of these caps. Let your iron do some work. You can always preheat these boards. Comes right off, just like butter. Now this is also where you could experiment with your temperature and air speed. Because what happens is, if you've got your temp too low and too much airflow and it's not melting those pads enough, you can start warming up these little components here. And we're going to try and wipe some of these off the board. And what'll happen is, all of a sudden you'll go like that, and now you got a mess. See how easily these all fall off of there? So the faster you can get in and get your part out, the better. So we've already got this board warmed. Let's grab this one. So you can see your solder liquefying. It's already off, look at that. Now look at this guy, this is cool. Not sure what this is, probably a voltage regulator. It's pretty beefy. Get that out of our way. See, this board's warm already. That's the other thing when you do these harvests. You'll start warming this board up to the point where stuff just falls off. Which makes it a challenge, because if you wanted to remove this part without losing all those, that's where the practice comes in. See how everything's just coming off? I've got this board so warm already. See how it really takes a lot of care. When this board starts heating up, you can start moving a lot of the components you don't want to move. But it does make it fun to harvest. Everything's just falling off at this point. This is interesting. I wonder what this is. Is this a BGA? So it would really help to heat up the bottom of the board for a chip like this. That's a BGA. Another BGA. Now these guys are all gonna come flying off because everything's so hot already. See, this is another chip. So if you're taking something apart and you're trying to practice on it, this would be another good one. If you could get this off and then resolder it on, and the device worked for you again, that's good practice. Off to the 12th dimension. There it is. So what else do we got on here? We're going to save those for the tweezers. So let's bring in some solder tweezers now and see how these do. Again, something you could practice on. Alright, so let's try some hot tweezers now. You'll see the difference. These are a little more precise. Very small components off and put them back in. You know, again, this is a good way to practice. These look funny. What are these things? That's got to be a capacitor. What is that? It just melted. Did you see that? What is that? That's just a solder bridge? Can't say I've ever seen something like that. You know, again, you could practice taking these caps off. Positioning them off to the side. You want to check for shorts. That one wouldn't be a good one because it's touching that guy. If you really want to save them, if you don't have sample books and you want to save these little guys, what are we hanging on? It's hanging on that solder pad. And that one just flew off to the 12th dimension. So what do we got left? That's kind of it. A lot of this really small SMD stuff. And again, if you wanted to, you could practice taking some of these off. These are really tiny parts. So what do we got left? We got one chip left. You could do low melt solder, but I'm actually not going to mess around with that right now. Now this board is probably cooled down now. So this would be more representative of what you'd have to do if you're trying to remove it without damage and put it back, or put a new one back on. So you can see how the solder starts to liquefy. And you really want to be ready, because when these guys come up, they're ready to come up. There is a limit to how much this stuff can take to heat. You can actually ruin a chip by heating it for too long and too much. So what is FB4? What is that? FB4, Q2, Q2 is probably that. FB4, is that an inductor? I think that's an inductor, but it started giving a funny reading, so it really doesn't matter. Oh, we got a couple things on the back here. You know, these hot tweezers are really nice because you see you can do this without using too much heat on the board. Very localized. And they'll handle a pretty decent sized part. All right. Well, like I said, that was fun and relaxing. And here's all our goodies. See if I can get it all scooped up here. Got a mix of stuff. Got some chips that we'll probably never use for anything. I have run into a couple of these that are pretty good. Been used on little projects. A couple caps, we'll check those out, see if they're any good. This was a funny 2-pin connector. Got a lot of fun stuff here. And again, sometimes it teaches you what you're looking at, what you've got, gives you a little practice taking it off, putting it on. So that's it for this time. As you see, we did not fix this board. In fact, we made it unusable. But it's interesting, fun, gives me a little release. Like, subscribe, we'll see you next time.